The saxophone player Sonny Rollins has died aged 95 years old. When somebody dies from the music industry, who I feel is relevant to this channel, I always jump straight on and make a video to express how I feel at that moment in time. I don't do any research. It's literally, I react to the event on camera. And so I've literally just woken up and seen the news. And so I've got to try and do Sonny Rollins some justice on this video. Where do we start with a giant like this? So on Sunday, I had a concert up in Liverpool, and I was driving up there with my friend Rob Grokert, and we started talking about the greatest living musician. Who's the greatest living musician? And I couldn't decide between Stevie Wonder and Sonny Rollins. It was interesting because obviously at that moment in time he was still alive, and for me he represented the greatest living musician on the planet. That was a statement that seemed to me to be, without question. Now that state of affairs has changed, and Sonny Rollins is no longer with us. And with that, a certain connection to a period of music making goes. Yes, we have incredible musicians like Marshall Allen, who is, I think, 102 now and still gigging. It's incredible. It's like miraculous. And Marshall Allen was a very, very important musician in the history of Sun Ra's band, an incredible musician, and I in no way want to diminish his achievements. But Sonny Rollins may have been one of the 5 greatest improvisers of the 20th century. An absolute giant of jazz. He was born in 1930. He came to prominence at the end of the 1940s. And when we say prominence, I mean he stumbles into the music scene post-bebop at that time. He plays tenor saxophone. At this point, the great hero saxophone is Charlie Parker. He plays alto saxophone, but before him, the great heroes had been people like Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. Sonny Rollins is a big fan of Coleman Hawkins, so he plays tenor saxophone. It would be very easy to say he followed on from Charlie Parker, took the innovations of bebop and transferred them onto a tenor saxophone. And in a way, that's correct. I cannot think of a tenor saxophone player that emerges after Parker who then takes the music forward in the way that he does. But again, sorry, I have to have some water. This early in the morning. My mouth's drying up. But again, he doesn't do Sonny Rollins justice. He's too big. He's too colossal. He's too much of a giant. Where does this reputation come from? Well, as we said, he comes into the music scene in the late 1940s. He seems to follow in, like a lot of musicians that came in after Charlie Parker, in believing that the way to jazz salvation was through heroin, and he becomes a heroin addict. He attempts to hold a shop up or something like that, and he gets arrested for armed robbery, basically. Goes to prison for that, and they are sticking on what was then a very experimental methadone method of getting people off heroin. That works for him, and he returns to the music world held up a little bit. Many of these musicians were held up in being able to get in there at a young age, but perhaps with that there's some wisdom. He's made famous really by joining the Miles Davis quintet, which he does around about 54, I think, 1954, 1955. There was an album, Miles Davis with Sonny Rollins, and that not only showcases Sonny Rollins, but it also showcases his compositions. Now, as a composer and as a visionary, he is a lot different to his contemporaries. Sonny Rollins was a true jazz musician. He would take what seems like a quite superficial pop song or children's tune or whatever, and he would utilise that through his improvisationary skills to create great art. With the release of what many people think is his greatest album, Saxophone Colossus, it showcases the tune St. Thomas, which is based upon, I think, some sort of Caribbean folk melody, perhaps, that his mother used to sing to him when he was younger. When I first heard it, listening to the likes of Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane, I thought this was quite trite. I didn't understand what Ornette was doing, what Sonny Rollins was doing. What I didn't understand is that Sonny Rollins' his real powers, genius, musical power, comes from the improvisation itself. He's always searching, and unlike Charlie Parker, he will narrow down that search, just do a number of notes, and then utilise those notes in different ways to build up a great big construction. This is very similar to the way Coltrane was working. Coltrane was more of a maximalist, but there is a certain approach which I think is pushing at the edges of free jazz. This is all happening in the late 1950s. Sonny Rollins at some point hooks up with Ornette Coleman and starts to explore those ideas, but his belief in what he's doing and his continual Herculean approach to building his skill base as an improviser causes him in the late 1950s to stop playing. He withdraws from making music, and he decides to woodshed, as they say. But he can't woodshed at home. He neither has a woodshed or a house that he can play in. I believe that his next door neighbour was pregnant, didn't want to disturb her, so he starts to go out to a very famous bridge in his local area. I cannot remember the name of the bridge. And for 15 or 16 hours a day, he would stand on that bridge, whatever the weather, and play into the wind, into the rain, into whatever was going on, almost like a spiritual man going up the mountain to meditate. He returns to jazz making with his album, which I think is his greatest album, called The Bridge. This does show a renewed and more intense approach to improvisation than he even had before. And again, for me, listening to him, it is a mixture of traditional improvisation, just utilising the skills of jazz to create incredible music, and a reduction of ideas to simple essences, which are then built on to create huge, expansive improvisation. So, what do we mean by his genius? Well, I'm going to tell you two stories. One is the famous story relayed in Ken Burns' jazz documentary. Some critic, it could be Gary Giddings, goes to see Sonny Rollins at a club. It's the day before Easter Sunday. And around about just before midnight on the Saturday, he's involved in some incredibly intense Sonny Rollins improvisation, and he's completely absorbed in this act of improvisation. And he's playing like this, and suddenly, out of all this stuff, he quotes a quite trivial tune, which goes like this: "Put on your Easter bonnet with all the frills upon it," and then he goes back into improvisation. He quotes a tune which I believe is called Easter Bonnet. Is it from Meet Me in St. Louis with Judy Garland? I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm sat here relaying what I know about Sonny Rollins to you, off the cuff, as it were. that's quite clever that he was able to quote that. And then Gary Giddings, or whoever it was, looked at his watch and he noticed it had just struck midnight. In amongst all that, Sonny Rollins was so aware he was able to know the time, know it was just about to go to midnight, and was able, for the vocabulary he had, to quote that line, which of course, as the clock strikes and you go into Easter Sunday, you would be putting on your Easter bonnet. When I was a kid, I had a video, which I think was recorded in the 80s, maybe the 90s, of Sonny Rollins live. I always felt that Sonny Rollins live was a different thing to his albums. You really had to understand what he did by listening to him live. At the end of the 1950s, he started experimenting with a piano-less trio. Double bass, drums, tenor sax. This allowed him more freedom, but it also meant that he had to be able to outline the structures without having the chords of the piano to underpin this. This was incredibly influential, gave him a lot of freedom. It then went on to influence Ornette Coleman to have a pianoless quartet, and I believe laid the groundworks for the great power trios like Cream, Jimi Hendrix experience in the late 60s. There is a Live at the Village Vanguard made with that trio, which is a brilliant example of Sonny Rollins in a live situation. This video I had, who was on it? I believe it could have been Mark Johnson on bass, I'm not too sure. Marvin Smith on drums. That might be able for you to find out the video that I had. I used to watch this over and over again, and his power, the only musician I could think that equaled him in terms of that sort of drive and power was John Coltrane. But Sonny Rollins seems even more in control of the phrasing. What he does is about phrasing, and that makes him different to Coltrane. And if I try and get into a video where I'm going to try and compare Coltrane to Sonny Rollins, it's not going to go well. So let me move on from there. Anyway, on this video, at a certain point, he falls off the stage. He's really into what he's doing. He actually falls off the stage, and it's a long drop onto a stone floor. And I believe he broke his hip or his leg or his ankle, something like that. He breaks a bone, I believe. And rather than everyone rushing out to save him, he rolls over onto his back and he carries on playing. Around about 2000, and probably about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he had some sort of lung illness, I think. His lungs became weaker. He was unable to play the saxophone. I found that very sad, that the man was unable to play saxophone. But he was interviewed and he seemed quite happy. I think he lived into advanced years, perhaps because of a certain attitude towards life, which had become, by that point, quite calm and spiritual. I always loved watching these interviews with him. And then every now and then you get the spark of a guy that had been in New York at the end of the 1940s in the post-bebop era and hung out with criminals and gone to prison. You knew this guy was of a certain cut from a certain cloth, an incredible musician. So, for me, what would have been my default response, who's the greatest living musician? Sonny Rollins. I can no longer say that. He passes now into myth. And we lose again a little bit of the contact with these things that made 20th century music so incredible, and what motivates me to be here talking to you and have the life I've had and then have the YouTube channel I have now. What an incredible musician. What an incredible musician. For me, he really is. What do I want to say at the end of this video? It's hard to say. Okay, let's say this. A couple of years ago, I made a video that said, why is modern jazz so all sound the same? And it resonated in the music world, and it made the channel a lot bigger. I then started to explore the history of jazz, and I said that something was quite contentious, and it still seems contentious to this day. I said that jazz was not black music. It was American music. And it was the product of American folk forms, the American history, and all sorts of people had been involved in the creation of this music. Black musicians, however, with no other art forms to express their genius through jazz. The establishment white racist world wanted to market jazz by sticking a label on it, jazz, calling it jungle music, and trying to make out that these musicians were incredible. They were incredible because there was some sort of inherent, sort of Rousseauian talent there. I never believed that to be the case. I always felt that jazz was an incredibly sophisticated music form. It doesn't start off like that. Jazz does not start off as a sophisticated music form. It starts off as a sort of party marching band, sort of good time music. But geniuses like Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton, and then Bix Beiderbecke and Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington, they come in and they turn it into an incredibly high art form that's got nothing to do with Africa. It's got nothing to do with any of that. When I was in the middle of all this and I was getting so much criticism for this, I started to read what Sonny Rollins said. And to paraphrase him, he said that this music, jazz, is an American music form, and that it is not related to Africa, and it is not, as he said, to do with the American Negro as such. Now, why would he say something like that? Well, for me, the thing that trumps this idea of this collective group of people creating this music form was created for everybody to be involved in. And that sounds a very lovely come-by-our statement to make. But what that really means is that anybody could come into this music and express themselves and show their individuality, and their genius and individuality is theirs. Louis Armstrong's genius belongs to nobody, no identity group, no historical group. It cannot be pinned down. It's his individual genius that shines forth. And this is a universal thing that applies to all humanity. Humanity creates geniuses, and their genius shines forth, and you diminish it by trying to put it inside a box. Sonny Rollins, as I talked to him, was not a bebop musician. He wasn't a hard bop musician. He wasn't a free jazz musician. He wasn't a West Coast musician. He wasn't an East Coast musician. I cannot box him. And there he is stating that this music is not rooted in these usual cliches of, oh, this came from Africa, or this came from this community, or it's a product of this, it's a product of that. No, it's a product of individuality. And Sonny Rollins is a great individual. And maybe one of the reasons why he is so hard to compartmentalise is because he really didn't fit into he doesn't fit into anything. He is just Sonny Rollins. And his genius is the utilisation of simple music from the people, and utilising true jazz. I want to use technology because that's what it's like, a technology, the technology of jazz, to create the highest music ever. And he believed in that till the day he died. That was always there. Never stated it like that. He's not trying to elevate the music up. It's nothing about that. He's not trying to make a statement about the people or this music. No, he's doing what jazz does. You take a tune, can be any tune. It could be Stravinsky or Bartok. But jazz comes from the American people. And it brings in influences from outside, from the Caribbean, from South America, from Europe. And then utilising the incredible thing that jazz gives us, which is still alive. It still exists. However much we say jazz is dead, it will never be dead for someone to take a tune and embellish it. And in embellishing it, put their individual stamp on it, thereby making a statement of their own individuality and humanity, which then echoes across the world, and we recognise it. And we recognise the human in Sonny Rollins. We recognise his genius as being human and being frail and all that. But we also feel that we are in presence of a giant, of a colossus, a man undiminished, who was able to get to 95 years, a strong, powerful man who made strong, powerful music that was beautiful, frail, but also incredibly intelligent, was searching, did not have all the answers, but it had all the questions. It was alive, and it was in the moment. And for many decades, you could be what does music do for me? When I think about it as a whole, what does it do? It reassures me. That's what it does. Music reassures me. And for a long time I could be reassured that somewhere in the world, Sonny Rollins was in a jazz club or preparing to be in a jazz club, and he would step forth and do his thing. And it was a force of nature. That was sort of snuffed out 10 years ago, but we knew the man was there. He's no longer there. This is a huge event in music history. And for me, it's the severing of something now. I cannot think of a musician that was greater than Sonny Rollins that is alive. Like I said, Stevie Wonder may well be up there. Now, this is a momentous event. Let's see how the media treats it. Maybe they won't quite understand what this means, but we do, don't we? Sonny Rollins, born, don't know the date, but born in 1930, died 2026. The greatest musician alive.